Every year, on the exact same night, at the exact same time, Grandma would burn a photograph. Not throw it away. Not tear it up. Burn it. The ritual never changed. October 14th, 9:30 p.m.
Backyard.
Metal bowl. A single match. When we were kids, we thought it was just one of her strange habits. Grandma had many of those. She refused to move the old clock in the hallway. She never slept with the bedroom door fully closed. And she never, ever explained October 14th. The first time I saw it happen, I was 10. I had followed her quietly through the kitchen, barefoot, curious. The backyard was cold that night, the kind of cold that makes your breath visible. She stood near the old oak tree, holding a photograph between her fingers like it weighed more than paper should. Her face wasn't angry. It wasn't sad. It was something else. Determined. Resolved. She placed the photo in the metal bowl and struck a match. The flame caught slowly, curling the edges inward. For a brief second, I saw the image before it blackened. A man standing beside her, his arms slightly behind her back, both of them younger, smiling. Then it was gone. She didn't cry. She didn't pray. She simply watched until the last ember faded, then crushed the ashes with the bottom of the bowl and walked back inside. When she saw me at the kitchen doorway, she didn't look surprised. "You shouldn't watch things that aren't meant for you yet," she said calmly.
Yet.
That word stayed with me for years. By the time I was 16, I realized the pattern. Every October 14th, another photograph disappeared. Always at 9:30. Always outside. Always silent. I once tried to sneak into her closet the day before the ritual. I found a small wooden box hidden on the top shelf. Inside were neatly stacked photographs, each labeled on the back with a year in her handwriting. 1975, 1976, 1977, one photo per year. 23 total. I didn't open them. Something about the way they were arranged felt sacred, dangerous, even. But I noticed something strange. Each year, the man beside her looked slightly older, just like her. It wasn't a collection of random memories. It was a timeline, and she was destroying it. When I confronted her once, carefully, gently, she didn't deny it. "Some memories need to end on schedule," she said. That was all. No name.
No explanation. No emotion.
Just certainty. By the 24th year, the ritual had become heavier. Grandma moved slower. Her hands trembled slightly when she struck the match. But she never missed it. Not once. And then came year 25. By then, I was 35. My brother had moved out of state. Grandma was 79, frilier but still sharp-eyed. That October felt different from the start. She seemed distracted. Quieter than usual. I caught her staring at the old oak tree in the backyard more than once. On October 14th, at exactly 9:25 p.m., she walked to her closet. But this time, I followed her openly. She reached for the wooden box. Her hands paused over it longer than usual. For the first time in 25 years, she hesitated. "Grandma," I said softly. She didn't turn around. "You don't have to do this." Her shoulders stiffened slightly. "Yes," she replied.
Ido.
She took out the final photograph. I noticed immediately. It wasn't labeled with a year on the back. Just a name. Daniel. My stomach tightened. That was the first time I had ever seen his name. We stepped into the backyard together. The night air felt heavier than usual, as if the sky itself knew something was about to shift. She placed the photograph into the metal bowl, but before she could strike the match, I reached forward and gently took her wrist. Her eyes snapped to mine, not angry, not startled, afraid.
"Please," I said.
"Tell me who he is." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind moving through the oak leaves. Her grip on the matchstick tightened. "He was my son," she said quietly. The world tilted. I had known my grandmother my entire life. I knew about my father. I knew about my uncle. I knew about every branch of our family tree. There was no Daniel. He died. she continued, her voice steady but distant. At least, that's what everyone was told. The match fell from her fingers onto the grass, unlit. And in that moment, for the first time in 25 years, the photograph did not burn. The wind moved softly through the oak tree above us, but neither of us stepped back inside. The photograph lay in the metal bowl between us, untouched, as if even the night understood it had been spared. My heart was pounding so loudly, I was sure she could hear it. "You had another son?" I asked carefully, the words feeling fragile in my mouth. Grandma didn't answer immediately. Her eyes were fixed on the photograph, on the face of the young man smiling beside her, frozen in time. "I had 3, she said finally, but only 2 were allowed to live." The sentence didn't make sense at first.
Allowed. As if someone had decided which child could exist.
"What does that mean?" I whispered. She slowly bent down and picked up the photograph, holding it closer to her chest instead of placing it back in the bowl. For the first time in my life, she looked smaller, not physically, but emotionally. The certainty she carried for decades had cracks in it. "Daniel was born before your father," she began, her voice distant, like she was narrating someone else's story. "He was different, curious, questioned everything. Too much, some would say." I felt a chill creep up my spine. "Different how?" I asked. She gave me a faint, sad smile. "He didn't accept things just because they were said. He wanted proof. He wanted fairness. He believed rules should protect people, not silence them." She paused, inhaling slowly. "And that made him dangerous." Dangerous to who? The question hung between us, heavy and unspoken. "He was 19, she continued. "The factory had been cutting corners for years. Unsafe wiring, poor ventilation, faulty equipment. Daniel worked there part-time while attending school. He saw things.
He documented them.
He talked about reporting it." A memory flashed in my mind. Old newspaper clippings I had once seen in her attic about a factory fire decades ago. I had assumed they were random memorabilia. My stomach tightened. "The fire," I said quietly. She nodded once. "The fire." "It was an accident," I said automatically, repeating what I had always heard growing up. "That's what the town was told." Her voice sharpened slightly, not with anger, but with pain. "The night before Daniel planned to meet with an inspector, the factory burned. Officially, it was faulty wiring. Unofficially," she swallowed, "there were people who stood to lose everything if Daniel spoke." The air felt thinner. "So he died in the fire?" I asked, barely breathing. She looked at me then, directly, and in her eyes I saw something I had never seen before, guilt mixed with relief.
"No," she said.
"He didn't." My thoughts scrambled. "But everyone said many things," she interrupted softly. "Bodies were unrecognizable. Records were rushed. Insurance claims were filed quickly. It was chaos. And in chaos, truth is easy to rearrange." My legs felt weak. I sat down on the old wooden bench near the tree. "If he didn't die, then where has he been?" Her fingers tightened around the photograph. "Gone." "Gone where?"
"Hidden."
The word felt like it had weight, like it had cost her something enormous to say it. She lowered herself onto the bench beside me. "The night of the fire, Daniel came to me before it started. He was scared. Not of losing his job. Not of embarrassment. He was scared because someone had warned him, told him accidents happen to people who cause trouble." Her voice trembled for the first time. "He was 19. I felt anger rise in my chest, anger at faceless men, at corruption, at a town that had accepted a convenient tragedy. "So you helped him disappear?" I asked slowly. She closed her eyes. "I chose to save my son." The simplicity of that sentence broke something inside me. All these years, I had thought October 14th was some strange grief ritual. I hadn't realized it was a countdown, a controlled destruction of evidence. 1 photo per year, erasing his existence piece by piece. Why burn the photos? I asked. To protect him, she replied immediately. The fewer traces he left behind, the safer he would be. The town believed he died. The men who threatened him believed it too. But if they ever suspected otherwise, she didn't finish the sentence. She didn't need to. Is he still alive? I asked. Silence. That silence said more than any answer. For 25 years, she whispered, I kept one photograph from every year before he left. A reminder. A promise. And every October 14th, I burned one. Not because I stopped loving him, but because I had to let the past fade enough to keep him safe. My throat tightened. Why stop tonight? She looked down at the photograph labeled Daniel. Because tonight marks 25 years since the fire. The number settled into my mind like a ticking clock finally reaching zero. 25 years of silence. 25 years of hiding. 25 photographs burned. And I pressed gently. Her gaze drifted toward the house, toward the darkened windows. Because tonight, she said, I was supposed to burn the last one. A strange dread crept over me. Supposed to? She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and pulled out something small and folded. Her hands trembled as she handed it to me. It was a letter, the envelope worn at the edges, postmarked from 3 days ago. I stared at it. You heard from him? Her voice cracked, barely audible. After 25 years, yes. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the leaves above us. I looked from the unopened letter to the photograph still resting safely in her hands. What does it say? I asked. Her eyes filled with something that looked almost like fear, but not the kind she had shown earlier. This was different. This was uncertainty. I don't know, she whispered. I haven't opened it yet. And suddenly, the ritual made sense. She hadn't been burning photographs to forget him. She had been burning them to survive the waiting. For several seconds, neither of us moved. The unopened letter rested in my hands, impossibly light for something that clearly carried the weight of 25 years. Grandma's eyes stayed fixed on it, as though it might disappear if she blinked. I realized then that the ritual hadn't just been about protecting Daniel from the world. It had been about protecting herself from hope. Hope was dangerous. Hope could expose him. Hope could break her, if it was taken away again. You really haven't opened it? I asked softly. She shook her head. If I open it, then everything changes. The sentence sent a quiet chill through me. For 25 years, she had lived in careful balance. Burn a photo. Reduce the evidence. Preserve the lie. Survive another year. But a letter meant movement. A letter meant the past was no longer content to stay buried. Grandma, I said gently, you don't have to face it alone. Her lips curved into a faint, tired smile. I've faced it alone for a long time. The words weren't bitter. They were factual. My fingers hovered at the edge of the envelope. The paper was slightly creased, as if it had traveled far. Do you want me to open it? I asked. She hesitated. Then she nodded. The sound of the paper tearing felt louder than it should have in the quiet backyard. I carefully unfolded the single sheet inside. The handwriting wasn't hers. It was firm, controlled, slightly slanted. Mom, it began. My chest tightened. I swallowed and continued reading silently for a moment before my voice found its way back. I don't know if this will reach you. I don't know if you're still at the house. But if it does, I need you to know I kept my promise. Grandma's hand gripped the edge of the bench. I built the life. A quiet one. I changed my name. I stayed away. Every October 14th, I wondered if you were still burning the past for me. I hated that you had to, but I understood. Her breath caught. I'm writing because the men who made me disappear are gone now. 2 passed away. The 3rd sold what remained of the company. There is nothing left to threaten. I don't want to hide anymore. The wind stilled completely, as if the world itself was listening. I'm coming home on October 14th, if you're willing to see me. The date at the bottom was signed 3 days ago. My pulse began to pound in my ears. I lowered the letter slowly. He says he's coming tonight.
Grandma didn't speak.
She didn't cry. She simply stared at the oak tree, the place where 25 memories had turned to ash. Tonight, she repeated faintly. It's October 14th, I said. Her eyes widened slightly. 9:42 p.m. A sudden understanding hit me like a wave. All these years, she burned a photograph at 9:30 p.m. The fire had started at 9:30 p.m. 25 years ago. That had been the official time of the accident. He had chosen the same night, the same date, to return. Headlights swept briefly across the fence at the edge of the yard. Both of us froze. The car engine outside cut off. For a long moment, neither of us breathed. Grandma's fingers dug into the photograph of Daniel. The final one. The only one left. Footsteps on gravel.
Slow.
Careful. I stood up instinctively, my heart racing so violently it felt painful. The gate at the side of the yard creaked open. The sound was unmistakable. Someone was inside the fence. Grandma didn't move. She looked smaller than I had ever seen her, but not weak. Just overwhelmed. A figure stepped into the soft porch light. A man. Mid-40s. Dark hair threaded with early gray. Broad shoulders slightly stooped, as though he carried invisible weight. His face was older than the boy in the photographs, but the eyes were the same. The same steady gaze. The same quiet defiance. He stopped a few feet away from us. For a second, no one spoke. The years hung between them like an ocean. "Mom," he said. The word shattered something in the air. Grandma inhaled sharply, the sound fragile and broken and full all at once. The photograph slipped from her fingers into the metal bowl, untouched by flame. "Daniel," she whispered. He took one cautious step forward, as if unsure whether this was real. As if 25 years of hiding had trained him not to trust moments like this. "I didn't want you to burn the last one," he said softly. A tear finally slid down Grandma's cheek. "I was going to," she admitted. "I know," he replied. "That's why I had to come before you did." The oak leaves rustled gently above us. The metal bowl, once a place of ritual destruction, now held the final photograph intact. 25 years of ash had led to this moment. Grandma stood slowly, her body trembling, not from age, but from the release of something she had held inside for far too long. She stepped toward him, and for the first time in 25 years, she didn't let the past burn. She embraced it, and as they held each other under the same tree that had witnessed decades of silence, I understood something I never had before. She hadn't been destroying memories. She had been protecting a future. And tonight, that future had finally walked back through the gate. For a long time, none of us moved. The porch light cast a soft yellow glow over the three of us, and I realized I was witnessing something that didn't just belong to our family. It belonged to time itself. 25 years had collapsed into a single breath. Daniel stood there, still holding himself as if he might need to disappear again at any second. Grandma's hands rested against his shoulders, almost as if she needed physical proof that he was real, that he wasn't just another memory waiting to turn to ash. "I thought you might not come," she said quietly, her voice uneven. "I almost didn't," he admitted. "I drove past twice." The words hit me harder than I expected. 25 years of hiding doesn't just vanish because someone writes a letter. Fear becomes a habit. Silence becomes a reflex. Grandma stepped back slightly, studying his face. "You're older," she whispered. He gave a faint smile. "So are you." There was something heartbreakingly normal about that exchange. Not dramatic. Not cinematic. Just two people measuring the years they lost. I finally found my voice. "Do you want to come inside?" Daniel looked at me for the first time. His eyes searched my face, calculating, cautious. I realized he didn't know me. He had missed my childhood, my graduation, every birthday. I was a stranger carrying his history. "You must be," he began. "Her grandson," I finished softly. Something in his expression shifted, regret, maybe. Or relief that the family he left behind had continued. We moved inside slowly, as though any sudden motion might break the fragile reality of the moment. The kitchen light felt brighter than usual. The familiar ticking clock sounded louder. Daniel's gaze moved around the room carefully, taking in the small details that hadn't changed. The old cabinet handles, the patterned curtains, the worn table where so many dinners had been eaten without him. "It looks the same," he said. "I kept it that way," Grandma replied. Not because she resisted change, but because she had been waiting. Daniel sat at the kitchen table, hands clasped tightly. Grandma placed the final unburned photograph in front of him. He stared at it for a long moment. "I didn't know you kept one from each year," he said. "I needed something to burn," she answered honestly. "Otherwise, I would have come looking for you." That confession lingered in the air. The ritual hadn't just been about protecting him from powerful men. It had been about restraining herself, about not exposing him through desperation. "The men who threatened you?" she asked quietly. "Are you sure?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Two are gone. The third sold his stake and moved overseas. The company dissolved years ago. There's nothing left to hide from." Grandma exhaled, and I realized she had been holding that fear in her lungs for decades. "But I didn't come back just because it's safe," he continued. "I came back because I'm tired of not existing." That sentence felt heavier than anything else he had said. "You have a life?" I asked carefully. He nodded. "A wife. A daughter. She's 22. The number made my chest tighten. Somewhere out there was another branch of our family tree, unknown, unseen, living under a different last name. "Do they know?" Grandma asked. "They know I left home young. They don't know why." Silence stretched between us again. This time, it wasn't fear. It was reckoning. Grandma reached across the table and placed her wrinkled hand over his. "You don't have to hide anymore," she said. "Not from them. Not from us." Daniel swallowed, and for the first time since he arrived, his composure cracked slightly. "I don't know how to just walk back into a life that buried me." "You don't," she replied softly. "You build a new one on top of it." The simplicity of her answer stunned me. 25 years of ritual, of ash and smoke and controlled destruction, had led her to this clarity. She had never been trying to erase him. She had been preserving the possibility that one day he could return without being hunted. "What about the town?" I asked. Daniel's jaw tightened. "The town believes I died. Officially, I did." Grandma glanced toward the window, toward the oak tree. "Then maybe it's time the town learns it was wrong." Daniel looked at her sharply. "That could stir things up." "Let it," she said, and there was steel in her voice now. "I burned photographs to protect you, not to protect lies." The shift in her was undeniable. The woman who had carefully reduced her past to ashes every October 14th was gone. In her place was a mother who had survived long enough to see fear expire. I realized something then. The ritual had ended not because the photos were gone, but because its purpose had been fulfilled. The doorbell rang. All three of us flinched. Daniel's body went rigid instantly, old instincts snapping back into place. Grandma didn't move. "Who knows you're here?" I asked. "No one," Daniel replied. The doorbell rang again. Slower this time. Deliberate. The air in the kitchen thickened instantly. 25 years of caution rushed back into the room like smoke. Grandma stood up slowly. "Stay here," she said. But Daniel was already on his feet. "I'm not hiding again," he said quietly. The doorbell rang a third time. And suddenly, I understood something terrifying. The ritual may have ended, but the past might not have. The third ring of the doorbell didn't just echo through the hallway. It felt like it reached back through 25 years of silence and pulled everything forward at once. None of us moved for a second. The air in the kitchen had shifted from fragile reunion to quiet danger. Daniel's shoulders had tensed the way they must have the night he disappeared. I could see it in his eyes, that old instinct to run, to vanish before someone else made the choice for him. But this time, he didn't step back. He stepped forward. Grandma walked toward the front door slowly, but not hesitantly. There was something different in her posture now. For decades, she had carried fear like a shadow stitched to her back. Tonight, that shadow seemed smaller. Daniel stood just behind her, close enough to act, but not hiding. I followed a few steps behind, my heartbeat loud enough that I was sure whoever stood outside could hear it. When Grandma opened the door, the porch light revealed a man in a dark coat, older than Daniel, but younger than Grandma. His face was unfamiliar to me, but not to them. I saw recognition hit Daniel first, not shock, not relief. Calculation. The man didn't look threatening. He looked tired. "I wasn't sure this was still your address," the man said calmly. His voice carried no urgency, no anger. Just certainty. Grandma didn't speak. Daniel stepped forward into the doorway, fully visible now under the light. The man's eyes widened slightly, but he didn't seem surprised. "So," the man said quietly, "you're not dead." "No," Daniel replied, steady this time. "I'm not." There was a long pause, not the kind filled with immediate danger, but the kind heavy with unfinished history. The man sighed and ran a hand over his face. "You picked the worst night to come back," he said. "People have been asking questions again." Grandma's voice cut in, firm and sharp.
About what?
About the old company records. About the money that disappeared before the collapse. Some names resurfaced. Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't retreat. "That was never about me," he said. "You all knew that." The man nodded slowly. "We did. But rumors don't die easily. Especially when someone who's supposed to be dead might suddenly be alive." I realized then that this wasn't a hitman. This wasn't someone coming to drag Daniel back into hiding. This was someone who had also lived under the weight of those same years. Someone who had benefited from Daniel's disappearance, and maybe someone who had regretted it. "What do you want?" Grandma asked, her voice steady. The man looked at Daniel. "Closure. The same thing you probably want." He hesitated. "The investigation is reopening. Not criminal, civil. People want answers. If you're alive, the truth will come out anyway. Better it comes out controlled." Daniel exhaled slowly, the kind of breath a person takes when they realize running isn't an option anymore, not because of fear but because of exhaustion. "I didn't steal anything," he said firmly. "I took the blame so my name wouldn't drag you all down with it." Grandma's head turned sharply toward him. "You never told me that." "I couldn't," he replied softly. "If you knew, you might have defended me. And that would have put you in danger too." The man nodded. He signed papers taking responsibility. That's why it ended quietly. We let the story die with him. The truth settled over the porch like dust finally falling after years in the air. Daniel hadn't just been hiding from threats, he had been protecting them from scandal. From financial ruin. From public shame. Grandma stepped fully outside now, standing beside her son. "Then let it come out," she said. "All of it. No more ashes. No more lies." The man studied her face carefully, then gave a slow nod. "It won't be easy." "It hasn't been easy for 25 years, she replied. Silence lingered one last time, not tense now, but transitional. The kind that marks the end of one chapter and the uncertain start of another. Daniel looked at the oak tree, then back at the house, then at Grandma. "I'm not leaving again," he said quietly. "Not to the man. Not to me. To her." Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she reached for his hand. Openly, in the porch light, where anyone passing could see. "Good," she whispered. The man stepped back from the doorway. "I'll be in touch," he said before walking down the path and disappearing into the dark street. When the door finally closed, the house felt different. Not lighter, but honest. The last photograph still sat on the kitchen table, untouched. For 25 years, Grandma had burned pieces of her past to protect her son from men who valued power over truth. But tonight, she chose something braver. She chose to stop hiding. And as we stood there together, 3 generations under one roof again, I understood something clearly. The ritual hadn't ended because the danger was gone. It ended because fear no longer owned this house. Morning didn't explode into chaos the way I half expected it to. There were no sirens, no black cars idling across the street, no sudden knocking at the door. Instead, sunlight crept through the curtains like it had every other day of my childhood, as if the night before hadn't rewritten everything I thought I knew about our family. But something had changed. The house felt awake in a way it hadn't in years. Not tense, not hunted, just aware. I found Grandma in the kitchen before anyone else was up. She was sitting at the table with a final photograph in front of her, the one she hadn't burned. The morning light hit the image differently now, revealing details I'd never noticed: the edge of a building in the background, a company logo faintly visible on a truck behind Daniel's shoulder, a date printed in the corner that aligned exactly with the financial collapse everyone used to whisper about. "You didn't sleep," I said gently. She didn't look up. "I slept more peacefully than I have in years." There was no tremble in her voice anymore. The fear that once dictated her every move had thinned into something sharper: resolve. Daniel came into the kitchen moments later, looking older in daylight. Not fragile, just real. The myth of the dead son had been replaced with a breathing, flawed human being who had made impossible choices. He poured himself coffee slowly, like someone reacquainting himself with ordinary rituals. "We need to get ahead of this," he said quietly. Grandma nodded. "Then we tell it ourselves." By noon, calls had started. Not threats. Questions. The man from the night before, whose name I learned was Victor, had already informed certain people that Daniel was alive and willing to cooperate with the reopened civil review. The company's collapse had left investors bitter but quiet. Many assumed Daniel had been the scapegoat who conveniently died before defending himself. Now that he was alive, narratives would shift. But what none of them knew, what only Grandma had guarded for 25 years, was that Daniel hadn't been the architect of the loss. He had been the shield. In the early afternoon, Grandma did something I never thought I'd see. She gathered every remaining photograph, not just Daniel's, but old family pictures, company parties, holiday gatherings, and laid them across the living room floor. Instead of choosing one to burn, she began organizing them chronologically. "We're not hiding the story anymore," she said. "We're telling it correctly." Daniel sat beside her, pointing out faces, naming names I'd never heard. One executive who'd pushed risky investments. Another who quietly withdrew his money weeks before the collapse. Patterns started forming that made the original narrative look painfully convenient. "You signed responsibility papers," I reminded him. "Why?" "Because someone had to," he replied. "If the investigation went deeper back then, it would have exposed corruption that would have destroyed more families than just ours." Some of those men had connections. Powerful ones. I thought disappearing would end it cleanly. But it didn't, Grandma said softly. It only postponed it. By evening, Victor returned, not alone this time, but with a thin folder under his arm. He looked less guarded than before. Less like a messenger, more like a man tired of carrying someone else's version of history. "The review board wants a statement," he said. "Recorded. Transparent." Daniel didn't hesitate. "Then let's do it." They set up a simple camera on the dining table.
No dramatic lighting.
No lawyers hovering in the background. Just Daniel speaking plainly about what happened, the pressure from senior partners, the manipulated forecasts, the internal vote he opposed. He didn't accuse recklessly. He presented facts. Dates. Emails he had preserved quietly all these years. Copies Grandma had kept hidden behind the wall panel in her bedroom. The same panel she once used to hide the photographs before burning them. When it was over, there was no applause. Just a long silence. Victor closed the folder. "This will shake things." "It's supposed to," Grandma replied. That night, for the first time in my life, there was no photograph set aside for burning. Instead, Grandma placed the final one, the one from the oak tree, into a new frame. She didn't hide it. She placed it on the mantel above the fireplace, where everyone could see. 25 years of ritual had not been about obsession or denial. It had been a countdown, a promise she made to herself that as long as she kept vigil, she would be ready for the day her son came back or the day the truth demanded to be told. And now both had happened. In the days that followed, the story spread, not as scandal, but as correction. Headlines shifted from missing executive presumed dead to former executive breaks silence on corporate collapse. Some names resurfaced uncomfortably, some reputations cracked. But Daniel stood firm. He didn't hide again. What surprised me most wasn't the public reaction. It was Grandma's transformation. She began sleeping through the night. She started walking to the market again, without glancing over her shoulder. The ritual that once consumed her had ended, not in tragedy, but in completion. One evening, as we sat under the oak tree, the same tree from the photograph, I asked her something I'd been afraid to voice for years. Were you ever afraid he wouldn't come back? She smiled faintly. Every day. Then why keep burning the photos? Because hope needs discipline, she said. If I kept every memory intact, I would have drowned in them. Burning one each year reminded me that time was moving. That one day, the last one would be the only one left. And what if he never came back? She looked at Daniel, who was laughing softly at something Victor had said across the yard. Then I would have kept that last photo, she replied. And I would have told the truth anyway. The wind moved gently through the branches above us. For years, I thought those ashes scattered in the garden were signs of grief. Now I understood they were signs of endurance. Grandma didn't burn photographs because she was broken. She burned them because she was waiting. And when the 25th year arrived, she didn't need fire anymore. She needed light. The 26th year arrived quietly, without ritual, without smoke, without the smell of ash drifting through the backyard. For the first time in over 2 decades, the date passed without Grandma standing by the fire pit, without the careful way she used to hold a photograph between her fingers, as if it weighed more than paper ever could. Instead, she woke up early, dressed in the soft blue sweater. Daniel remembered from his college graduation and asked us to drive her somewhere she hadn't visited in 25 years. The cemetery. Not because Daniel had been buried there was never a body, but because a headstone had been placed there in his name. A compromise the lawyers insisted on back then. Closure for the public. Silence for the family. We stood in front of a stone that carried a lie carved into granite. Daniel Hayes, beloved son, 1968 to 1999. Grandma reached out and touched the engraved date with steady fingers. This was the only grave I visited without a body beneath it, she said quietly. And every year when I burned a photo, I told myself I wasn't mourning him. I was mourning the version of him the world believed. Daniel swallowed hard. Seeing your own name on a grave does something to a person. It forces you to confront the years you didn't get to live publicly. The birthdays missed. The friendships dissolved. The reputation frozen in time. Victor had arranged the paperwork weeks earlier. The review board had officially cleared Daniel of wrongdoing after the evidence came to light. Several former executives faced delayed but real consequences. Not prison in every case. Time had softened some punishments, but enough public acknowledgement to rewrite the record. A small crew from the cemetery waited at a respectful distance. When Grandma nodded, they began removing the headstone. It wasn't dramatic. No music.
No speeches.
Just the quiet scraping sound of metal against soil as a false ending was lifted out of the ground. Daniel didn't cry. Grandma did. But they weren't tears of grief. They were tears of completion. That evening, back at the house, she asked for something none of us expected. Bring me the ashes. For 25 years, she had kept the ashes from the burned photographs in a simple wooden box in her closet. We used to think it was another strange habit. Now, it felt sacred. Daniel carried the box outside, setting it on the garden table beneath the oak tree where the first photograph had been taken. Grandma opened it slowly. The contents were gray and light, almost weightless. Fragments of decades. Memories transformed by fire. I don't regret burning them, she said. Each one helped me survive the year it represented. But they don't need to stay in a box anymore. Daniel looked at her carefully. What do you want to do? She smiled. Not the guarded smile we had known for years, but something softer. Plant something. We dug a small circle in the soil near the oak tree. Not a grave. Not a memorial. Just a space for something new. Grandma poured the ashes into the earth with steady hands. Then she handed Daniel a small sapling, a young maple tree she had ordered weeks earlier.
You planned this, I said.
I hoped, she corrected gently. Daniel placed the sapling into the soil mixed with ash and earth. As we covered the roots, it felt symbolic in a way none of us needed explained. 25 years of secrecy and sacrifice weren't being erased. They were being transformed. The following months brought attention Daniel never asked for. Invitations to speak about corporate accountability. Interviews. Articles dissecting the old scandal with fresh eyes. He declined most of them. He wasn't interested in reclaiming fame. He was interested in rebuilding quietly. Grandma, on the other hand, surprised us again. She agreed to one interview. Just one. The journalist expected drama.
Tears.
Accusations. Instead, Grandma spoke calmly about loyalty, about the weight of protecting someone you love, about the cost of silence. She didn't paint herself as heroic. She didn't frame Daniel as a victim. She simply described what it meant to choose patience over panic. When you love someone, she said into the camera, sometimes you don't fight the world loudly. Sometimes you outlast it. The clip circulated online. People didn't just react to the scandal, they reacted to her strength. Letters began arriving at the house, not threats, not curiosity, but gratitude. From mothers who had waited for sons in war zones. From wives who stood by partners during wrongful accusations. From families who understood that time can be both enemy and ally. One evening, months later, as autumn painted the leaves gold, I noticed something different about the maple tree. It had taken root, stronger than expected, taller than it should have been in such a short time. Grandma sat beside it in a lawn chair, knitting quietly. Do you ever miss the ritual? I asked her. She considered the question. I don't miss the burning, she said, but I do respect it. It reminded me that grief isn't something you ignore. It's something you manage piece by piece, year by year. Daniel joined us, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. The three of us sat there without speaking for a while, listening to the wind move through two trees now instead of one. For years, we thought Grandma burned photographs because she couldn't let go. We were wrong. She burned them because she refused to let the wrong story survive longer than the truth. The 25th year wasn't the end of something tragic. It was the end of something unfinished. And the 26th year? It wasn't about fire. It was about roots, about rebuilding a name, about turning ashes into something that could grow tall enough for future generations to sit beneath and ask, what happened here? And this time, the answer wouldn't be a mystery whispered in smoke. It would be spoken clearly, in daylight, by the people who lived it. Winter came slower that year, almost as if the season itself hesitated to settle over a house that had finally learned how to breathe again. The maple tree lost its leaves, but it stood firm beside the oak, its thin trunk steady despite the cold winds. Grandma liked to sit by the window, where she could see both trees at once. She said they looked like two chapters of the same story, one older, scarred, deeply rooted, the other young, still stretching toward the sky. By December, something unexpected happened. Daniel received a letter, handwritten, no return address. For a brief second, the old tension flickered across his face. 25 years of caution doesn't disappear overnight. He opened it slowly at the kitchen table while Grandma pretended not to watch. It wasn't a threat. It was from one of the former junior analysts who had worked under him during the collapse. The man wrote that he had stayed silent back then out of fear. He admitted he had known certain projections were falsified before the public release. He apologized. Not for the company, not for the money, but for allowing Daniel to carry the blame alone. Daniel read the letter twice. Grandma finally asked, "Does it give you peace?" He thought carefully before answering. "It gives me context." That night, something shifted again, not in the public narrative but within our home. For the first time, Daniel spoke openly about the years he had spent in hiding. Not the logistics, not the locations, but the emotional cost. The birthdays he watched from afar through forwarded photos. The news clippings he collected quietly. The way he had considered returning many times, but stopped himself because the legal storm hadn't yet settled. "I wasn't brave," he admitted. "I was scared of making it worse." Grandma reached across the table and held his hand the way she used to when he was a child afraid of thunderstorms. "Bravery isn't loud," she said softly. "Sometimes it's just staying alive long enough to fix what you can." In early spring, Daniel made a decision none of us expected. He wanted to reopen the foundation his father had started decades earlier, a small scholarship program for students studying ethical finance. It had dissolved quietly after the scandal. Now, with his name cleared, he wanted to rebuild it. "Why finance?" I asked. "Because the system only changes when the people inside it do," he replied. Grandma didn't say anything at first. Then she stood, walked to the fireplace, and removed the framed final photograph, the one from the oak tree. She handed it to Daniel. "Put this in the office," she said. "Not as a reminder of what you lost, as proof of what you survived." The foundation reopened that summer. It wasn't large. It wasn't flashy. But applications poured in. Students wrote essays about transparency, accountability, courage in corporate environments. Daniel read each one personally. On the 27th anniversary of the collapse, a date that once carried dread, we gathered under the two trees again. This time, there was no box of ashes. No hidden documents. No waiting. Grandma brought out a small wooden plaque and asked Daniel to nail it gently to the base of the maple tree. It read, "Truth may take time, but time belongs to those who endure." No mention of scandal. No names. Just a quiet declaration. As the sun set, casting long shadows across the yard, I realized something that had taken me years to understand. The ritual of burning one photograph every year wasn't just about grief or protection. It was about pacing hope. Grandma had refused to let despair consume all 25 years at once. She divided it, managed it, survived it. Now there was nothing left to burn, only things to build. Later that evening, when most of the guests had gone and the yard was quiet again, I found Grandma alone by the window. She wasn't watching the trees this time. She was watching Daniel laugh inside with the scholarship recipients, his voice carrying through the open door. "Are you finally at peace?" I asked her. She considered the question carefully, as she always did. "Peace isn't the absence of pain," she said. "It's the absence of fear." "And you're not afraid anymore?" She shook her head gently. "No. The truth doesn't need protecting anymore." A few months later, Grandma's health began to decline, not dramatically, not tragically, just the natural slowing of a life that had carried more weight than most. She spent her final weeks in the same house she had defended with ritual and patience for decades. One evening, as Daniel sat beside her bed, she whispered something that stayed with us long after she was gone. "I didn't burn the photos to erase you," she told him. "I burned them to keep the world from erasing you." When she passed, it wasn't during a storm. It wasn't during some cinematic moment of chaos. It was quiet, gentle, almost like the closing of a well-read book. At her memorial, Daniel didn't speak about the scandal. He didn't recount the investigation or the headlines. Instead, he told the story of a mother who divided her heartbreak into manageable pieces and survived long enough to see her son's name restored. Years later, the maple tree grew taller than the oak. Students still sit beneath it during scholarship gatherings. They don't all know the full story. They don't need to. They just know that something meaningful happened in that yard. Something about patience, about integrity, about waiting without surrendering. And every year, on the anniversary that once carried fire, Daniel places a single framed photograph on the mantel, not to burn, not to hide, but to honor. Because some stories aren't meant to turn into ash. Some are meant to grow roots deep enough that no storm, no accusation, no passing year can ever uproot them again. The first year without Grandma felt unfamiliar in a way grief alone couldn't explain. The house was quieter, yes, but not hollow. Her absence didn't echo the way we feared it would. Instead, it settled into the walls like warmth left behind after a long winter. Daniel moved into the upstairs study permanently, turning it into the foundation's working office. The framed photograph from the oak tree remained on the mantel, exactly where she had placed it, but now beside it stood something new, a small portrait of Grandma herself, not formal, not posed, just laughing at something outside the frame. On the anniversary of the 25th year, the day that once smelled of smoke, Daniel did something none of us expected. He invited the first group of scholarship recipients back to the house. Not for ceremony, not for publicity, but for a conversation. They sat in a circle beneath the maple tree, notebooks in their laps, questions in their eyes. Daniel didn't give them a lecture about markets or ethics.
He told them about fear.
About silence. About how easy it is to justify looking away when the consequences feel too large to confront. I made mistakes, he told them honestly. Not in stealing or lying, but in believing that disappearing was the cleanest solution.
It protected some people, yes.
But it also prolonged the truth. One student asked quietly, "If you could go back, would you handle it differently?" Daniel looked toward the house, toward the window where Grandma used to sit. "I would still protect the innocent," he said, "but I wouldn't let fear decide the timeline." After the students left, I stayed behind to help clean up. The sun was setting, casting long golden light across both trees. The maple's branches had grown strong enough now to cast real shade, something impossible to imagine when we planted it in ash and soil. Daniel stood beside it, hands in his pockets. "She divided her grief into years," he said softly. "I think now I have to divide my responsibility the same way." "What do you mean?" "One honest decision at a time. One correction at a time. No more running." That night, he opened a box I hadn't seen before. It wasn't the ash box that had long been emptied into the earth. This one contained letters. Not from the public. Not from the press. But from Grandma. 25 envelopes, each dated with the year she burned a photograph. "She wrote these?" I asked, stunned.
He nodded.
"One, every year." She mailed them to a P.O. box I kept active. I was never supposed to read them unless I came back. My chest tightened. "Did you?" "Not until after she passed." He handed me the first one. Inside, her handwriting was steady, firm, and heartbreakingly calm. She wrote about ordinary things, the garden, the weather, neighbors moving away. But between those lines were coded reassurances. Updates about the legal environment. Subtle hints that certain investigations had cooled. Signals meant only for him. "She wasn't just waiting," I whispered. "She was guiding you." Daniel smiled faintly. "She never stopped being my mother." We spent hours reading them, year after year of quiet endurance documented in ink instead of fire. The letters revealed something the burned photographs never could. While the world thought she was letting go, she was building a bridge. Toward midnight, Daniel folded the last letter and placed it back in the box. "She never wrote one for the 26th year," he said. "Why not?" He looked out the window toward the trees swaying gently in the night breeze. "Because by then I was home." The next morning, something small but profound happened. Daniel removed the wooden plaque from the maple tree, not because he rejected its message, but because he wanted to expand it. He replaced it with a slightly larger one. It read, "Truth may take time. Time belongs to those who endure. And endurance belongs to those who love." No names.
No dates.
Just a philosophy rooted in lived experience. As years passed, the house slowly transformed from a place of secrecy into a place of mentorship. Young professionals visited regularly. Discussions about transparency, accountability, and moral courage filled the rooms that once held silence and fear. Sometimes, when new visitors asked about the two trees in the yard, Daniel would tell them a simplified version of the story, not about the scandal itself, but about patience, about how hope can be disciplined, about how grief can be portioned into survivable pieces. And occasionally, when the light hit just right in the late afternoon, I could almost see Grandma sitting by the window again, knitting quietly, watching over a world that finally understood what she had known all along. Fire can destroy evidence, but it can also mark time. And when used carefully, even ashes can become soil strong enough to grow something better than what was lost. The 25th year ended with truth. The years after that became about legacy, not the kind printed in headlines. The kind rooted quietly beneath two trees in a backyard where smoke once rose, and where now only leaves moved gently in the wind. The following year, something unexpected happened. The maple tree, which had grown steadily since it was planted in the ashes of the photographs, began to bear tiny buds earlier than usual. Daniel noticed them first while walking past the yard in the morning light. He paused, hand on the rough bark, and whispered, "She be proud." There was a reverence in his voice that spoke louder than any words about the foundation, the letters, or the lawsuits ever could. That spring, the house was alive in a way it hadn't been for decades. Students from the scholarship program returned, bringing notebooks, ideas, and questions about ethics and responsibility. Daniel didn't just lecture. He shared the story of patience and endurance he had learned from Grandma, how one can endure fear, time, and loss, and still survive with integrity. I watched him explain to them how each photograph burned, each letter written, and each year of quiet vigilance had created the opportunity for him to return safely, reclaim his name, and rebuild his life. Grandma's presence was felt everywhere in the house. Her voice, captured in those letters, guided Daniel's decisions. Even after she was gone, the cadence of her words seemed to ripple through the walls, gentle but firm. The rituals that once seemed obsessive had left a blueprint for resilience. Daniel followed it unconsciously, making thoughtful, measured decisions in the foundation, in personal life, and even in small moments like watering the maple tree or placing fresh soil around its roots. By midsummer, the maple had grown enough to cast a gentle shadow over the oak. The two trees now stood side by side, a symbol of past endurance and future growth. Daniel often sat beneath them, reflecting. One day, I joined him, noticing how peaceful he seemed. The tension that had followed him for 25 years, the constant wariness, the silent calculation to avoid danger, was gone. In its place was calm, a sense that the past had been confronted and finally set right. Evenings became quieter and warmer. We would sit together in the living room, windows open, listening to the wind moving through both trees. The framed photograph that had survived all the fires remained on the mantel, a testament not to loss, but to survival and hope. Occasionally, Daniel would pull out the letters Grandma had written every year, reading them aloud to the younger visitors who came to learn about resilience, integrity, and moral courage. By autumn, the first leaves fell from the oak, while the maple, still young, held on to its green. Daniel explained to a group of students, life isn't about burning the past. It's about transforming it. Ashes can feed the roots if you're patient. There was a sense of continuity in the yard, as though Grandma's wisdom had become embedded in the soil, in the trees, in the very air around the house. As the sun set on the 10th year after the first photograph burned, Daniel stood beside the two trees, looking at their intertwined branches. "She showed me how to survive," he said quietly. "Not just physically, but morally. And now it's my turn to live fully, not in hiding, not in fear, but with truth guiding every step." For the first time since the scandal, the house wasn't just a home.
It was a sanctuary.
A living monument to patience, endurance, and the quiet power of love. Grandma had left the world, but through her rituals, her letters, and her unyielding care, She had ensured that the family she protected and the son she waited for could finally breathe, grow, and thrive. And as the two trees swayed in the twilight breeze, it felt as if she were there too, still watching, still guiding, still proving that some stories, carefully tended, can flourish long after the fire has died.